by members of the Winnipeg. Got it. So we are joined today by members of the Winnipeg Foundation team. They will be sharing with us insights from the recent Vital Signs project. And in addition to the high-level findings of this community research project, they will share with us what needs and opportunities that they are seeing within our community. And so I would like to now hand it over to Courtney Feldman to start us off. Courtney.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction. And thank you for having us here as your guests today. As introduced, we're here to speak of the Vital Signs report that we recently launched. We'll speak about what the report is, and but more importantly, you know, what's the next step or steps, or what can we as community leaders, those passionate about serving and supporting community, can do with this information. But I'll just take one moment. We do have a team here to support this conversation from the Winnipeg Foundation. We all work to support the vision and mission of the Winnipeg Foundation, but through a slightly different lens, but we do work collaboratively. So I'll just take a moment to turn the mic over to my colleagues to introduce themselves and to share, you know, what lens they bring to this conversation. Carrie, can I throw it to you first?
Thanks, Courtney. My name is Carrie Ryan. I'm part of the Foundation's grants team. So primarily working with groups as they're preparing to apply to us to request funding, and then through the course of the grants decision-making and funding process. I have two portfolios. One of them, which relates most closely to your work at Rotary, is literacy education and employment. And so I'll be giving you a few grant examples that align with our vital signs and the work that you're doing at Rotary. Thanks, Courtney.
Jen?
Hey everyone, I'm Jennifer Litchfield, or Jen, as most people know me. I'm mostly here in the background today. I work on the donor engagement team, so I support a lot of various Rotary clubs in building endowments here and in the granting that comes out of those funds to support Rotary activities across the city. Among other things, I work with many individuals and families on their own generosity into the community, helping them connect with projects in the community and make donations that they care about. So I'm here just sort of in the background in case there's some questions around that side of things.
Excuse me, my name's Kevin Parsons. I work along with Courtney on our capacity building team at the Winnipeg Foundation. So that's kind of a vague title for a department, and sort of the way that we explain it is our CEO, Sky Bridges, often and says that as a community foundation, we can't grant our way out of everything. So we're sort of the non-grant side of helping bolster the sector and by extension of that, community.
Thank you. So and I'm Courtney Feldman. I work alongside Kevin with this team, and I was supported this initiative. So I'm here to share. We do have, I understand there's a little bit of we want to make sure we stay on time. So if you do have questions, maybe jot them down, and then we'll address and make sure that everybody has time for any questions or comments at the end. So we make sure that we get through everything first, and then we'll see how the time is going. So just very briefly, because not everybody is familiar or with the Winnipeg Foundation, but who we are and what we do. So we are the first community foundation that was established in Canada in 1921. We are an endowment-based funder, so that means that we gifts to the foundation are invested or held in trust, and not spent, but that interest earned on these gifts is given back to community through a variety of charitable activities. So we are developed by community for community organization. When I say about the charitable, how do we support communities? It's from connecting, as Jennifer mentioned, connecting the generosity of Manitobans and Winnipeggers to community through capacity building, as Kevin mentioned. That's training and development or research projects, or partnerships and collaborations, and through granting, which is probably our flagship and what most people will associate the Winnipeg Foundation with. And I'll just pass it over to Carrie here to expand on our grant making.
Thanks, Courtney. The Winnipeg Foundation is well known for its grant making. Last year, we granted more than $85 million back into the community, benefiting a total of about 1,100 charitable organizations. That represents all payments that were made by the foundation, and there are a number of mechanisms for returning money to the community. But of that 85 million, about 14.6, so around 17%, was in response to applications from registered charities, putting forward proposals requesting money of the Winnipeg Foundation. All of those proposals go to our grants committee made up of volunteers who make the final decisions on how that responsive grant making budget is spent. And again, last year it was about $14.6 million. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Winnipeg Foundation's responsive grant making. So we are a project funder. We don't provide ongoing operating support, but project funding is time limited. It's for a specific purpose. Groups apply for funding with a proposal to us. Our granting programs are flexible. The most common program is our community grants program, which supports a huge range of eligible projects, covers things like equipment, renovations, programming, staffing, pilot programs. Groups often ask us what they should apply for when they're looking at the Winnipeg Foundation, and we often advise them to apply for the costs that aren't covered elsewhere because our funding is so flexible. We call ourselves a 360-degree grant maker, and that means that we support the full range of charitable work in the city. So, a large portion of our grants fall into the community services area, which is quite broad. It includes children, youth, and families, seniors, a whole range of initiatives. We make grants in the area of health, recreation and wellness, arts, culture, and heritage, literacy, education, and employment, and the environment. Our granting focuses in on community needs, and the assessment looks at a range of factors, including the benefit to the Winnipeg community and the people who live here, the needs of the population that's being served by a project, as well as the individual organizations that are proposing the work. So have they demonstrated capacity? Have they demonstrated cultural competency? All of those kinds of factors go into the decision-making process. And our granting priorities align with the Foundation's strategic plan. And we'll be going through in a minute the research document that has informed our current strategic plan. And our strat plan for the next 4 years includes a number of what we're calling pillars, community pillars, as well as foundations that underpin the plan. And again, that's based on the research that's happened in the last little while. And I'll be sharing some grant making examples with you over the next few slides, but for now I will turn it back to Courtney.
Thank you, Carrie. So what is Vital Signs? Just so we're, for those who may have not heard of this initiative, it is a project of the Winnipeg Foundation that really was about engaging and research, so better understanding Winnipeg. We used both qualitative, so we went out into community and asked questions and focus groups, and quantitative, so data that we could find that was already available or through a survey, really to help us understand the well-being of Winnipeggers. We used a framework to support this work, so we just didn't go out there and think, oh, let's define well-being in whatever way we think. We used an assessment framework that was developed by Canadians for Canadians, so that this would, we wanted to ensure that all Winnipeggers could see themselves in this framework, and that we were taking a really comprehensive, broad, big look at community well-being, starting from a really big high level place. And that's what this report is. The Vital Signs Initiative, it empowers us to engage community. It empowers community to be a part of their conversation around their own well-being. We hope that this project, through conversations such as this one right now, we can share back what we're learning about Winnipeg, share back that knowledge with community so that it sparks future conversations that you have as community leaders. And as Carrie said, this information is used to inform our decision-making at the Winnipeg Foundation. We use both an internal and an external advisory committee to support this work. We work with partners such as the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and Probe Research to support the collection of our data. And as I said before, we engaged community through vital conversations where we worked with a variety of groups or demographic sectors across Winnipeg to really, I think data can only tell one story, but really to help us understand what's this data saying, what does it feel like, and what does it look like really in community when we talk about well-being. So that's just a little bit about the project, hoping to paint a picture about why we did this project and how we did it. But now I'm going to pass it over to Kevin and Carrie to share some of the findings of the report.
Thanks, Courtney. So before and just as a way to mention, and it might have been circulated already, but the full report is available on our website, and you can take a look. And what we want to go over right now is just a few of the some of the, I'm not going to say highlights, but some of the I guess targeted areas that we got that we're focusing on from what we found. But just before we do that, we want to talk about some of the sort of broad themes that we found through this engagement, because as Courtney said, the data only sort of tells one part of the story, and through this process and engaging in community, there were some themes that emerged. So very quickly, first being connectivity, and that's simply that people want to be connected with other people and with community at large, and that's essential to well-being. Community in and of itself is a pretty broad term, and it's a little bit different for everyone, and we can all be part of more than one community, our neighborhood, our Rotary Club, our perhaps religious affiliation, et cetera, et cetera. So just the communities that we move within, and feeling as though we have a place within them. Culture, so about connecting with people that have shared common experiences. So sort of a little bit more than community, whether it's a common background, sort of your coming to Canada story, perhaps, or your family's coming to Canada story, or if there's a sort of an institution that you've been a long part of, and experiencing that with folks and having that commonality. And then finally, there was a lot of focus, and again, this research was done in sort of 2021, 2022. So a lot of focus on the systems that are in society to support well-being. This was kind of done the middle-ish part of the pandemic. So there was a big focus on what those supports are, and then maybe what was lacking from that, as well as the other key themes from engagement. And not to go too much further on this, but just wanting to highlight these broader themes, because although we're going into some specific examples, as Carrie said up front, we are and continue to be a 360-degree grantor because of the and support organization, because of these sort of larger scale things of importance to Winnipeggers. So the first sort of highlighted area is the community's sense of belonging. So just as sort of a quick data note at the bottom, there is going to be the sources for all of what we're reporting, and for this one as well as a couple others. Sort of the historical numbers that you see right there are through Statistics Canada surveys, and then the most recent in 2022 is through our own survey that we administered through Probe Research. So the story here and what Carrie is going to speak to in terms of some of our response is that the positive news is sort of from the Stats Canada data, Winnipeggers and Manitobans had a higher sense of belonging for the most part than sort of the general Canadian context, which is always good, and it was rising over time. But perhaps not surprisingly, in 2022, that number dropped. The sense of belonging shifted, and again, we did this sort of during the pandemic times, so I don't think it's a huge guess as to why that may be the case. But just to take a step back, and the importance of the sense of belonging again goes back to what we were speaking of in the previous slide, that it's a very important component to life, and to sort of one's satisfaction is feeling belonging within the spaces that they interact with, as well as community, culture, etc. So with that, I'll ask Carrie to jump in and talk about the work we're doing in this area.
Thanks, Kevin. I selected a few examples from some of our recent granting just over the last year or so, even before this report came out, because these themes have been woven through our grant making for a long time. There's nothing new in a lot of these areas, but I wanted to select a few grant examples that I thought would intersect with the work that Rotary is doing, particularly around youth and education, because there's lots of really rich work happening in these areas. So when it comes to sense of belonging, we look at projects such as youth leadership and after school programs. And as Kevin mentioned, there's different ways of feeling that sense of belonging and feeling that sense of community. So for some youth, it's finding a culturally appropriate space that welcomes them. For others, it's something based in the neighborhood or based in their school that's easy for them to access. They might be aligning themselves with youth that have similar interests or similar backgrounds. But that's a really great example of an opportunity for youth to feel and build that sense of belonging. Another great example is employment readiness programs, and there are several of these in the city that are really bringing youth together, helping them build that confidence and build those skills to be employment ready, to help them in their search for employment, but also to make them feel supported in that and bring out that sense of community. And then another example is mentorship programs, particularly those for and by Indigenous youth. So, for example, we've supported for a number of years a program that provides wraparound support, particularly to Indigenous kids in the North End. The goal is to help them graduate high school, but along the way, they provide all sorts of different supports, family supports, moral supports, and also build up those youth to then become mentors for younger kids in that neighborhood. So there's a really nice progression there in terms of the role that the participants play, and again, all working around building that sense of belonging. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Carrie. So the next area of focus is trust in institutions, and there's a whole lot going on in this slide, and again, this is from the survey of the 1,200 Winnipeggers that we did. And more than focus on any specific number, the reason that we did this breakdown, which, I mean, looking at it, we've done this presentation before, and it doesn't necessarily fit with sort of the people's prior knowledge or your own lived experience. But what more than sort of the specific, first of all, we 1,200 Winnipeggers, we can't say, okay, this is what Winnipeg is, but we just wanted to show that when we speak about Winnipeg, that of course we're one big community in that way, but there's different people and groups within Winnipeg that have different interactions with institutions and sort of different experiences with them as well. So again, more than any specific thing here, because there's a lot of breakdowns and this and that, it's just to say that although something like trust in institutions, we could just sort of display the Winnipeg overall number, but that's not the lived experience to all Winnipeggers. So, and the importance of this is institutions are vital for sort of living in a stable society, and one that supports the folks within it, and in a way that is present but sort of not overreaching, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sometimes long-winded. I'll leave it at that and throw it back to Carrie to talk about some of our work in this area.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it was interesting to see these statistics and to try to find a spot where the foundation's work aligns, because, some of these systems we don't have a role in. But one of them I wanted to choose and highlight was education, trust in education as an institution. We do support a number of education programs, youth programs that introduce younger students to the idea of post-secondary education, particularly kids in Indigenous families, newcomer families, where there may not have been a long tradition of attending post-secondary institutions, or it could have been an interrupted tradition. So some of these programs that we support actually bring kids onto campuses so that they feel comfortable in that surroundings and they see that there's a place for themselves there. We have also supported financial empowerment for families to help them save for their children's education and plan ahead. So those are just a couple of examples of grants that we have made that work towards that idea of building trust in institutions. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Carrie. So next, we focused in on mental health. So just a quick note that again, so for the first 3 bars, it's Statistics Canada data, and then we have that Winnipeg survey, that black bar at the end for just Winnipeg. But this one sort of jumped out at us, the story being, and there was some consistency in people's self-reported mental health in between Canada to Manitoba to Winnipeg, and then they're all relatively similar, and then there's that sharp drop down in 2020, and again, not to belabor the point, I think we can all guess why. People's mental health really suffered during that first portion of the pandemic, and I don't think there's any sort of further explanation needed. The bit of a good news story is from the Winnipeg only survey, there was an uptick in 2022, which we hope to be true, but there's still a lot more work that needs to be done to close the gap of where things were. And as an organization and a community foundation, this is there's sort of twofold importance for mental health in the work that we do, because mental health is, I mean, as is in the description, a health issue for the individuals experiencing either a mental health crisis or a drop in their well-being due to mental health. But in addition to that, it's a societal issue that having mental health sort of, if things are going well, then there's more, like, sort of broadly speaking, then there's more engagement and more involvement and more satisfaction. And when things aren't going well, it can kind of compile that people might withdraw, and which then makes things worse, et cetera, et cetera. So again, not to sort of belabor what I'm sure we all recognize as important, and just toss it back to Carrie.
Thanks, Kevin. Again, I've chosen a few examples here that I think fit best or relate most with the priorities of your group as Rotarians. So some granting examples in this area are supports for kids or youth mental health, which include, one-on-one counseling and support groups. We also support culturally appropriate programming for Indigenous and newcomer youth. So that's one thing that we've heard is important, is to mental health, is making sure that kids feel that they are supported as individuals with their unique needs and backgrounds. And then another example is supportive employment training for youth who might have mental health issues. So we know that mental health can be a barrier to entering the workforce. And we have supported employment programs that look at that issue very specifically and help folks overcome some of those barriers and help build some skills that they can put into place in the workplace. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Carrie. All right. So again, sort of, I think an image that speaks for itself, and this is from the province of Manitoba. This is the deaths from overdose numbers from the past, from 2018 to 2021. And since this report came out, 2022, that number remained higher than it was in previous years, unfortunately. And again, this is something that's quite often in the news, but addictions, due to and specifically deaths, largely due to the ongoing and escalating opioid crisis and individuals experiencing addiction, transcends sort of economic and social classes, and it's an important, similar to the mental health, obviously the dual importance of those individuals experiencing addiction in addition to societally, because we obviously don't want to see more and more of our community members and folks within Winnipeg and beyond suffer in this way. So Carrie, I'll give it back to you.
Sure, thank you. So although the data related to this area is primarily focused on adults, we do know that youth face issues with addictions as well. And again, as Kevin mentioned, there's that huge overlap with addictions and mental health. So some of the granting examples that we have in this area that would relate to youth are groups that provide education and outreach to youth, as well as a growing trend that we're now seeing is groups that provide naloxone for folks who are using drugs to help prevent those accidental and fatal overdoses that we're seeing more and more of. Thanks, Kevin.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And then the next slide is in relation to that as well. So just continuing with the addictions, along the addictions conversation, is that this is the wait times for provincially funded beds for folks that are wanting to address their addictions and deal with that within their lives. So to say that for men specifically, there's 36 beds available, and it's about at the time of this, it was about a 44-day wait time to get one of those beds, and then perhaps, which isn't good to begin with, and then perhaps even more alarmingly, there's 25 beds available for women, and it's a 119-day on average wait time to get one of those publicly funded beds, and so that doesn't include any private institutions, but as we know, again, going back to, it sort of transcends economic and social classes. There's folks that aren't able to, the private beds aren't accessible to them because there's fees involved, et cetera. So Carrie already sort of gave the examples in this area, but just wanted to point out that, again, it's bad thinking it's a month and a half for men, and it's just sort of mind-boggling that it's about 4 months for women to receive a bed when they're in a place to address their addiction. So this is straight from Harvest Manitoba, and I believe this is their year-over-year March data in Winnipeg, and the usage of the food bank. So this is households, not individuals, accessing the Harvest Manitoba's services in the month of March over the number of years. And again, it's a sort of steady and alarming growth in what's needed. And the other side of this is, and again, something that's widely in the news, food's just getting more expensive. So it's again a trend that's unfortunately we kind of expect to continue to see rise. And Carrie, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Kevin. The need for food in the community is just ballooning and continues to grow. And we're seeing it constantly through the applications that we receive. Groups that have never before distributed food started doing food hampers or food distribution during the pandemic and have just never stopped because the need from their communities just continues to grow. Some of the work that we've been doing in this area includes providing funds for the snack or meal components of after school or drop-in programs for youth, and in some cases school breakfast programs, as well as nutrition-focused programming for youth, which might include an after-school program where students get some hands-on experience cooking, planning a meal, budgeting, grocery shopping, and that kind of thing. But again, the need in this area just cannot be understated. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. And I know that we're kind of right up against our 30 minutes, so I'll try to there's just a couple slides and that I'll compress, but wanted to highlight the need for housing in our community, sort of with the next two. This one, we need to do a good job explaining this one because this is experiences of homelessness, and it's done through End Homelessness Winnipeg Street Census. So in 2018 and 2022, End Homelessness Winnipeg, which is a consortium of organizations that aim to combat homelessness, they quite literally go out and speak to people on the streets one evening and night in those years to try to determine what the scale of people experiencing homelessness in Winnipeg is. And it's a snapshot in that evening. So although that total number went down between those 2 years, we want to be very careful to say like, oh, look at all of this, we're dealing with it, because we know that I mean, a few things. One is it's very, very hard to nail down a number, because homeless people experiencing homelessness often move, we might say, in and out of the situation. They might have a temporary bed at a shelter or be able to stay with friends and family for a while, but that isn't permanent. And then secondly, without having a permanent address, it's often folks that say a census or a Stats Canada survey will never reach, because there's no permanent place to find them. So it's a very, very hard number to nail down. And Homelessness Winnipeg themselves, even with the street census, their estimate is it's likely double or more what they're able to find individual in those nights. And it's really just meant to show that homelessness continues to be an issue, as well as there's different ways of experiencing homelessness. It's not literally just, in an encampment or sleeping outside, but provisionally accommodated. So you're able to crash on a couch for a while, say, or in those emergency shelters, who do very good work and important work, but isn't a permanent solution. And then I'll just jump into in relation to that, housing affordability. And this is from CMHC, their survey. And it's about the number of affordable housing units for low-income renters. So just want to do a bit of a comparison to other cities that are sort of comparable to maybe Winnipeg's size to ish. But for every 20 low-income renters, Winnipeg has about 3 units available, whereas Regina has 8.4 and Calgary has 9. So all of those numbers in an ideal world would be 20, 20, 20 per 20 low-income renters. But even in a situation where across Canada there's a need, Winnipeg falls even shorter than that, very unfortunately. So I think one last time I'll ask Carrie to jump in and talk a little bit about our work in this area.
Thanks, Kevin. And again, I've chosen examples that are specific to youth, just keeping in mind your interests. But certainly youth aging out of care represent a large proportion of the population in Winnipeg who are unhoused, either recently aging out of care or in the past. But we provide support to organizations that reach out to youth who are on the streets, as well as provide some assistance with systems navigation. So for many, and as Kevin has indicated, if you don't have a street address and you don't have a phone number, it's hard to access the services and the resources that you might need. So there's services that provide that systems navigation that can help connect youth with some resources. And so we support organizations that provide that service.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie. So that kind of concludes our sharing of some of the findings, the data, what the data was saying in our report. And just very briefly, Winnipeg's Foundation's response has been, in general, that we're going to continue. We need to continue to listen, to learn, to understand from community. We need to continue to collaborate and connect with community. As Kevin said, Sky Bridges, our CEO, says we need to connect and collaborate and learn, because granting alone will not solve society's or challenges that we're facing. And that we are, through this, we're becoming, we are an evidence-informed organization. As Carrie mentioned, the strategic plan that was recently announced is built on 4 pillars, and this is all available online. But community impact speaks to the generosity of Winnipeggers and creating opportunities to connect that generosity to community. Excuse me, that's community generosity. Community impact is that connection and granting to community with a focus on underrepresented sections of the community. Endowments, we will continue to be an endowment-focused organization, but we'll explore new ways that we can leverage this model to connect the generosity of Winnipeggers to community. And there are several champion initiatives that I encourage you to look up in our strategic plan. Some of them focus on children in care, supporting or children to not go into the care system, and then on the other end of that, supporting children as they come out of the care system. All of this work is done through multiple lenses, through an Indigenous trust philanthropy lens, the significant impact and influence of climate, diversity, equity, inclusion, and the power and influence of information technology and what that looks like for our work. That's a very brief overview of the Winnipeg Foundation's response so far to this vital signs, but I'm going to pass it over to Carrie for one last time to speak of some connections to your work, to your work specifically.
Thanks, Courtney. I know we're either over time or getting close to time, so I'll just race through these last couple of slides. And if you have questions after and want to follow up, that is completely fine. I just wanted to give you some insight into some of the things that we're seeing, because it may be impacting your grant making or your grant making decisions as well. Community-wide, we are still seeing the impacts of COVID on groups working across a huge range of sectors. There's fewer funding sources right now. Many are precarious financially. Those groups that used COVID, the emergency COVID funds the government was providing, it was so well needed and appreciated. Many were using that as a bit of a cushion for the last couple of years, but that cushion is now dwindling. So those programs are drying up, and groups don't have that same same leeway in their budgets that they had for a little bit of time during the pandemic. As we mentioned earlier, a hugely increased demand for food, as well as demand for programming generally, and rising costs due to inflation. So it's more expensive to deliver programs. Any group that runs a vehicle or is providing food is seeing increased costs. Frontline staff are having to deal with mental health and addictions issues, many of them for the first time, many of them with minimal training or access to resources. And that is causing enormous burnout in the sector. And we're seeing burnout at the leadership level as well. Lots of organizations are, CEOs or executive directors are moving on. There's lots of turnover. For years, these groups have been dealing with just mounting pressure without the resources to deal with it. And then specific to the sectors that you're working in, I wanted to share a few kind of trends that we're seeing as well. And some of these have come up a little bit already, but the pandemic has created long-term impacts on kids, particularly in the areas of education. So learning loss is still an issue. Many kids have not caught up or made up for the time that they missed when schools were closed. Lack of connection, teachers are saying that students just don't have the same social skills that they once had. So students are having to rebuild that ability to connect with other people. Students who didn't have access to technology, either during the pandemic or now, are continuing to struggle. So there's an increased demand from groups that are providing after-school programming and homework support just to help students keep up with their schoolwork. We're seeing increased need for mental health supports for youth, particularly since the pandemic. Those needs are rising. Families are increasingly relying on schools for food security and other basic needs in a way that we were not seeing before the pandemic, and schools are strapped. They just have limited budgets to help meet those needs, but are trying their best to do so. And then finally, the need to create culturally safe spaces for Indigenous and newcomer youth, where they feel that sense of belonging and feel that sense of support. In order for them to thrive, they need those basic needs taken care of. So I feel like I've just fire hosed a whole bunch of information your way. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions now or in the future.
Perfect. That concludes kind of our formal sharing of information. And I do apologize for going over our time allotment, but we are happy to stay on or to excuse ourselves, depending. We'll take the lead from you.
Oh yeah, no, please